Hi, I'm Dr. Natalie Brooks, and this year my mother threw my doctoral diploma in the trash at my brother's engagement party because she said it was embarrassing the family. But that wasn't even the worst part. They'd already told everyone I was unemployed, tried to set me up on dates with men who had real jobs, and when I finally got the call that would change everything, they hung up on the university president thinking it was a prank. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never thought vindication would come wrapped in a mahogany nameplate and a corner office, but sometimes the people who underestimate you the most give you exactly the fuel you need to prove them wrong. The rain was coming down in sheets across Portland that October evening, the kind of Pacific Northwest downpour that turns the world into watercolor. I sat in my Honda Civic outside the Willamette Valley Country Club, watching valets in crisp white shirts escort guests with umbrellas the size of small tents. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the golden glow of chandeliers and people in cocktail attire already mingling with champagne flutes. My brother Marcus was getting engaged tonight, and somehow, despite everything, I'd still shown up. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one more time. The black dress I'd chosen was simple, professional, the kind I wore to academic conferences. No sequins, no plunging necklines, nothing that would give them ammunition. My hair was pulled back in a low bun, and I'd kept the jewelry minimal, just the small silver earrings my grandmother had left me. In my purse was a carefully wrapped gift, a vintage first edition book on architecture that had cost me 3 weeks of grocery money, because Marcus had mentioned loving Frank Lloyd Wright during one of our rare conversations. The text from my mother had arrived that morning. Please try to blend in tonight. This is important for Marcus's career. Vanessa's family will be there. Translation: don't embarrass us with your unemployment situation. Don't mention your degree. Don't talk about your research. Just smile, eat the expensive food, and pretend you're normal. I pulled my coat tighter and made a run for the entrance. The doorman, a kind-faced man in his 60s, held the door with a warm smile. Evening, miss. Welcome to the Willamette Valley Club. Inside, the warmth hit me immediately, along with the subtle fragrance of white roses and something expensive burning in the fireplace. The lobby was all marble and mahogany, the kind of understated wealth that whispered rather than shouted. A young woman with a clipboard and a headset approached me with the practiced smile of someone who'd perfected customer service. Good evening. Name for the guest list? Natalie Brooks, I said, shifting the gift to my other hand. She scanned her tablet, her finger trailing down what looked like a lengthy list. Her smile flickered for just a moment. Oh yes, here you are. You're listed under, Natalie, Marcus's sister. No +1 noted. There it was. Not Dr. Brooks, not even my last name paired with my first. Just an appendage to my brother's identity. I forced what I hoped was a gracious smile. That's me. She handed me a name tag with Natalie, printed in elegant script, nothing more. I noticed the other tags around me had titles, company names, full names in proud font. Dr. Harrison from the medical center. Jennifer Walsh, senior partner, Walsh and Associates. Even the caterers had more formal identification than I did. I pinned the tag to my dress and followed the soft classical music toward the main ballroom. The space was breathtaking, with exposed wooden beams overhead and windows that would normally offer a stunning view of the valley, though tonight they showed only darkness punctuated by the occasional flash of lightning. Round tables covered in ivory linens were scattered throughout the room, each centerpiece a masterpiece of white orchids and trailing ivy. I began the familiar dance of finding my assigned seat, weaving between clusters of people who looked like they belonged in a lifestyle magazine. The conversations I caught fragments of involved vacation homes in Cabo, stock portfolios, and children at private schools, with names like Brookfield Academy and St. Catherine's Prep. Table 12 was in the back corner, tucked behind a decorative column that partially obscured the view of the head table, where Marcus and Vanessa would be seated. The table was smaller than the others, clearly an afterthought, and when I reached it, I realized why. The place cards read like a collection of distant relatives and family friends who hadn't made the cut for premium seating. Great Uncle Harold, who nobody had spoken to in 5 years, the Johnsons from my parents' old neighborhood, and Cousin Rita's teenage daughter who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. My place card was slightly askew, the calligraphy smudged at one corner like it had been reprinted at the last minute. I straightened it and took my seat, the view giving me a perfect angle of the kitchen doors and the side of a server station. From here, I could hear the clatter of dishes and the occasional sharp instruction from what I assumed was the catering manager. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 years of graduate school, 3 years of postdoc research, and a dissertation on sustainable urban development that had been praised by professors across the country, and here I was, relegated to the kids' table at my own brother's engagement party. I opened the program that had been placed at each setting, a beautiful cream-colored card with Marcus and Vanessa's names embossed in gold. Inside was the evening's timeline: cocktail hour, dinner, toasts, and dancing. There was a small paragraph about the couple, highlighting Marcus's recent promotion to senior architect at Morrison & Associates, and Vanessa's role as marketing director at a boutique firm downtown. Successful. Established. Everything my parents had dreamed of for their children. Natalie! The voice was my mother's, bright and artificially warm, the tone she used when she was performing for an audience. I looked up to see Patricia Brooks approaching, resplendent in a navy blue cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. Mom, I stood to hug her, breathing in her familiar perfume, a scent that somehow managed to be both comforting and intimidating. You look. She paused, her eyes taking in my outfit with the practiced assessment of someone who'd been judging appearances her entire life. Nice. Simple. That's good. She glanced around the table, noting my dining companions with barely concealed disappointment. I'm sorry about the seating. The planning committee had very specific requirements about table arrangements. You understand. What I understood was that I'd been hidden away like an embarrassment, but I nodded anyway. Of course. This is fine. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. Vanessa's parents are here tonight. Her father owns 3 dental practices, and her mother sits on the hospital board. They're lovely people, very accomplished. You know how to behave at these things. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Don't mention your degree that nobody understands. Don't talk about your research that doesn't pay the bills. Don't remind anyone that you're 32 and still struggling to build a career in a field they consider impractical. I'll be fine, Mom. Good. She straightened, her smile returning to full wattage. Oh, and if anyone asks what you do, just say you're between opportunities right now. It sounds better than... Oh, you know. She glided away before I could respond, leaving me standing there with the phantom weight of her disapproval settling on my shoulders like a familiar coat. I sat back down and reached for my water glass, noting that my hand was trembling slightly. Around me, the other guests at table 12 were deep in conversation about safe topics, the weather, the beautiful venue, how lovely Vanessa looked. The first course arrived, a delicate salad with pears and candied walnuts that probably cost more per plate than I spent on food in a week. I ate slowly, half listening to Great Uncle Harold's story about his fishing trip to Alaska, while watching the head table from my partially obstructed view. Marcus looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids. Vanessa was radiant, her engagement ring catching the light every time she gestured. They were surrounded by their successful friends, their accomplished colleagues, their bright and shining future. During the main course, herb-crusted salmon that melted in my mouth, the toasts began. Marcus's best friend from college spoke about their adventures in architecture school, their shared dreams of designing buildings that would change skylines. Vanessa's maid of honor shared stories of their friendship since high school, their parallel rises in their respective careers. Everyone laughed at the right moments, applauded at the appropriate times. Then my father, Kenneth Brooks, stood up. He'd always been a commanding presence, tall and broad-shouldered with silver hair that made him look distinguished rather than old. In his perfectly tailored suit, he looked every inch the successful insurance executive he'd been for 30 years. I want to talk about my son, he began, his voice carrying easily across the room. Marcus has always been special. From the time he was a little boy, building elaborate structures with his blocks, we knew he had a gift. He's worked hard to get where he is, and I couldn't be prouder of the man he's become. The speech continued, highlighting Marcus's achievements, his recent promotion, his bright future with Vanessa. It was beautiful and heartfelt, the kind of tribute any parent would be honored to give. But as I listened, a familiar ache settled in my chest. No mention of his other child. No acknowledgement that he had a daughter who'd also worked hard, also had achievements, also deserved recognition. When the applause died down, Patricia stood up beside him. She looked radiant in the soft lighting, every inch the proud mother. "Vanessa," she said, turning toward my brother's fiancé, "welcome to our family. You're getting a wonderful man. But more than that, you're joining a family that values success, hard work, and practical thinking. We're so excited to see what the two of you build together." More applause, more beaming smiles, more validation for the kind of life my parents understood and approved of. As dessert was being served, individual chocolate soufflés that arrived at each table like small miracles, I excused myself to find the restroom. I needed a moment away from the table, away from the constant reminder that I was the family member who didn't quite fit. The ladies' room was elegant and spacious, with individual stalls that felt more like small rooms and a lounge area with velvet chairs and a full-length mirror. I sat in one of the chairs for a moment, looking at my reflection and trying to summon the energy to return to the party.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
That's when I heard them. Two voices I recognized, Patricia and Vanessa's mother, Linda Walsh, talking by the sinks. "She seems sweet," Linda was saying, presumably about me. "What does she do?" There was a pause that lasted too long. "Natalie is figuring things out," my mother replied carefully. "She went to school for a very long time, but you know how it is with these academic types. Very smart, but not very practical." "Oh, she's unemployed?" Another pause. "She has a PhD in something environmental. Plants or trees or something like that. She spent 6 years studying, but there aren't really jobs in that field. We keep hoping she'll come to her senses and find something more stable." My cheeks burned. 6 years studying, quote, plants or trees or something like that. As if my research on sustainable urban development, my published papers on green infrastructure, my expertise in environmental policy, could be reduced to such casual dismissal. "That's unfortunate," Linda said, with the kind of sympathy reserved for family disappointments. "It's so hard when children don't live up to their potential. At least you have Marcus." "Yes," my mother agreed, her voice warm with pride. "At least we have Marcus." I sat in that velvet chair for a long time after they left, staring at my reflection and feeling something shift inside me. The careful composure I'd maintained all evening, the diplomatic smile, the willingness to be hidden away and diminished, it was all cracking like ice in spring. When I finally returned to table 12, the dancing had begun, the lights had been dimmed, and couples swayed to music, played by a small jazz ensemble in the corner. Marcus and Vanessa were in the center of the floor, looking like something out of a fairy tale, surrounded by their successful, accomplished, normal friends. I gathered my purse and the small gift bag I'd brought, preparing to leave early, but as I stood, Great Uncle Harold, who'd been surprisingly quiet during dinner, spoke up. "You're Kenneth's other daughter, aren't you? The one with the doctorate?" I nodded, surprised that anyone at this table knew about my degree. "Environmental science, right? Sustainable development?" When I nodded again, he smiled. "I read your paper on green infrastructure in urban planning. It was in the Journal of Environmental Studies last year. Brilliant work." I stared at him. "You read my research?" "I'm retired now, but I spent 40 years in city planning. Your ideas about integrating natural systems into urban development could revolutionize how we build cities. Have you thought about consulting work? There are municipalities all over the country looking for exactly that kind of expertise." For the first time all evening, someone was talking to me about my actual work, my actual accomplishments, my actual potential, not as Marcus's sister or Patricia's disappointing daughter, but as Dr. Natalie Brooks, environmental scientist. "I've applied to several positions," I said carefully. "It's a competitive field. Competitive because it's important, he replied. Don't let anyone tell you that what you do doesn't matter. Climate change. Sustainable development. These are the challenges that will define the next century. We need people like you. I left the party shortly after that, driving home through the rain with Uncle Harold's words echoing in my mind. As I climbed the stairs to my small downtown loft, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a flicker of hope. Maybe there was still a place for me in the world, even if it wasn't at my family's table. I hung up my dress carefully, made a cup of tea, and sat by my window overlooking the city lights. Tomorrow, I would continue my job search. Tomorrow, I would keep believing in the value of my work. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would bring the call that would change everything. What I didn't know was that somewhere across town, Dr. Helena Vasquez, the president of Pacific Northwest University, was sitting in her home office reading applications for a new department head position. And there, at the top of a carefully curated pile, was my CV, flagged by 3 different faculty members as the candidate they were most excited to interview. Sometimes the universe has a sense of timing that borders on poetic justice. But I wouldn't learn that until the phone rang 2 days later, while I was still processing the humiliation of being dismissed as unemployed at my own brother's engagement party. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reorganizing my research files for what felt like the 100th time. I'd been awake since 5, unable to sleep after another rejection email had arrived the night before. This one was from a consulting firm in Seattle, the 3rd company that month to tell me I was overqualified for their environmental planning position. Overqualified seemed to be code for, quote, we don't want to pay someone with a doctorate what they're worth. My phone rang as I was sorting through printed copies of my published papers, trying to decide which ones to include in my next application. The number wasn't one I recognized, but it had a local area code, so I answered. Dr. Brooks? The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight accent I couldn't place. This is Dr. Helena Vasquez from Pacific Northwest University. Do you have a few minutes to talk? I nearly dropped the phone. Pacific Northwest University was one of the most prestigious research institutions on the West Coast, known particularly for their environmental science programs. I'd applied for several positions there over the years, but had never gotten past the initial screening. Yes, absolutely, I managed, quickly moving to my small kitchen table and grabbing a pen. I'm calling about the department head position for our new Sustainable Urban Development program. I've been reviewing applications with my colleagues, and your background is exactly what we're looking for. Would you be available for an interview this Friday? I blinked hard, certain I'd misheard. Did you say department head? That's right. We're launching a new interdisciplinary program that bridges environmental science, urban planning, and policy studies. Your research on green infrastructure integration caught our attention, particularly your work on climate-resilient city design. Professor Sterling spoke very highly of your dissertation work. Professor David Sterling had been my doctoral advisor, a brilliant man who'd pushed me to think beyond traditional boundaries. I hadn't spoken to him in months, but apparently he'd been advocating for me in ways I never knew. I would be honored to interview, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What would the position involve? Building the program from the ground up. Hiring faculty, developing curriculum, establishing research partnerships with city governments. It's a significant role with a substantial budget and considerable autonomy. The university is committed to making this program a flagship initiative. After we scheduled the interview and she hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the phone. Department head. At 32. It was the kind of opportunity that usually went to senior faculty with decades of experience. The kind of position that could define a career. I spent the rest of the week preparing obsessively. I researched every faculty member in related departments, read every recent publication from their environmental science program, and developed a comprehensive vision for what the new department could become. I practiced my presentation until I could deliver it without notes, refining each slide until it told a compelling story about the future of urban sustainability. The interview was scheduled for Friday afternoon in the administration building, a beautiful brick structure covered in ivy that made the entire campus feel like something out of an academic movie. I arrived 30 minutes early, wearing my best suit, a charcoal gray ensemble I'd bought for conference presentations, and carrying a leather portfolio that contained copies of everything I thought they might want to see. Dr. Vasquez met me in the lobby, and I was immediately struck by her presence. She was probably in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to making important decisions. "Dr. Brooks, thank you for coming. I hope you didn't have any trouble finding us." "Not at all. The campus is beautiful." She led me through hallways lined with portraits of distinguished faculty and former university presidents, their painted eyes seeming to follow our progress. We passed students hurrying between classes, their arms full of books, and their conversations focused on upcoming exams and research projects. It was the kind of academic energy I'd been missing desperately. The conference room where the interview was being held overlooked the main quad, with tall windows that let in the crisp autumn light. Seated around an oval table were 5 faculty members, each representing different aspects of the program I'd potentially be heading. Dr. Vasquez made introductions as I took my seat at the head of the table. Dr. James Park from the Environmental Science Department was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who'd published extensively on pollution remediation. Dr. Sarah Chen from Urban Planning had written the definitive textbook on sustainable transportation systems. Professor Michael Roberts from the Policy Studies Department was known nationally for his work on environmental legislation. Dr. Amanda Foster from the Engineering Department specialized in green building technologies. And Dr. Patricia Williams from the Business School focused on the economics of sustainability initiatives. "Before we begin," Dr. Vasquez said, opening a thick folder in front of her, "I want you to know that this position has attracted significant interest. We've interviewed candidates from Harvard, MIT, Stanford. But your application stood out for several reasons, not least of which is your innovative approach to interdisciplinary research." The interview lasted 3 hours. They asked me about everything from my research methodology to my vision for faculty development. I presented my ideas for creating partnerships between the university and local municipalities, for developing a graduate program that would train the next generation of urban sustainability experts, for establishing research centers that could tackle real-world problems in real time. Dr. Park leaned forward during my presentation about green infrastructure. "Your paper on bioswales and urban flood management was brilliant. Have you considered how those principles might scale to larger metropolitan areas?" "Actually, that's exactly what I'd like to explore here," I replied, clicking to my next slide. I envision research partnerships with Portland, Seattle, maybe even international cities dealing with similar challenges. Students would work on actual urban planning projects while pursuing their degrees. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "Community-engaged learning. That's exactly what we need more of in academic programs." The questions kept coming, each one more complex than the last. They wanted to know how I'd handle budget management, how I'd recruit top faculty, how I'd balance research and teaching responsibilities. I answered each question drawing on my years of research experience, my time managing lab projects, my observations of successful academic programs I'd encountered. "One final question," Dr. Vasquez said as the afternoon light began to fade. "This is a high-profile position that will put you in contact with city officials, state legislators, federal agencies. You'll be representing not just the department but the entire university. Are you prepared for that level of visibility and responsibility?" I thought about the question carefully before answering. I've spent the last 6 years learning to communicate complex environmental science to diverse audiences. I've presented to city councils, testified at state hearings on environmental policy, published research that's been cited in federal climate reports. I understand that academic research is only valuable if it can be translated into actionable policy and real-world solutions. I'm not just prepared for that responsibility, I'm excited about it. They exchanged glances around the table, the kind of silent communication that happens among colleagues who've worked together for years. "We'll be in touch early next week." "Drive," Vasquez said as the interview concluded. "Thank you for your time today, Dr. Brooks. Your presentation was impressive." I walked back to my car in a daze, replaying every moment of the interview in my mind. Had I answered everything well? Had they seemed engaged with my ideas? It was impossible to tell, but I felt good about how I'd represented myself and my vision for the program. That weekend, I tried to distract myself with normal activities. I went to the farmer's market, read a novel I'd been saving for months, even attempted to clean my apartment thoroughly. But my mind kept returning to the interview, to the possibility that my career might be about to change dramatically. Sunday evening, as I was making dinner, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Natalie, how are you doing? I haven't heard from you since Marcus's party." "I'm fine, Mom, just keeping busy with job applications." "Oh, still looking? Well, I'm sure something will turn up eventually." "Actually, I called because Linda Walsh, you remember Vanessa's mother? She mentioned that her brother owns a marketing company. They might have an entry-level position available. It wouldn't require any special qualifications." I stirred my pasta with more force than necessary. "Thanks, but I'm actually pursuing opportunities in my field." "Sweetheart, I know you worked very hard on your studies, but maybe it's time to be realistic. You can't stay unemployed forever waiting for the perfect job that might not exist." "I'm not unemployed, Mom. I'm a postdoctoral researcher conducting important work on urban sustainability." "But you're not making any money from it, are you?" "That's what unemployed means in the real world." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice level. "I actually have some promising opportunities I'm exploring. I just can't discuss the details yet." "Well, I hope so. Your father and I worry about you. Maybe you should consider going back to school for something more practical. Business, maybe, or teaching. Something with actual job prospects." After we hung up, I sat with my untouched dinner, feeling the familiar weight of their disappointment settling over me like fog. Going back to school for something more practical. As if 6 years of doctoral work in a field addressing one of the most critical challenges of our time was somehow frivolous. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Pacific Northwest autumn weather that matched my mood perfectly. I was nursing my second cup of coffee and half-heartedly scrolling through job postings when my phone rang. Dr. Vasquez's name appeared on the screen, and my heart began racing. "Dr. Brooks, I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all. I'm an early riser." "Good. I have some news I'd like to share with you in person." "Would you be available to come to campus this afternoon? Say around 2 o'clock? My mouth went dry. Meeting in person could mean good news or bad news, but her tone seemed carefully neutral. "Of course. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself." "I'll meet you in my office this time." I spent the rest of the morning in a state of nervous energy, changing clothes 3 times before settling on a professional but not overly formal outfit. I arrived on campus with 20 minutes to spare and spent the time walking around the quad, watching students and trying to imagine myself as part of this academic community. Dr. Vasquez's office was on the 3rd floor of the administration building, with windows overlooking the campus library and distant views of the Cascade Mountains. The walls were lined with degrees from impressive institutions, awards for academic leadership, and photographs of her with various dignitaries and academic luminaries. "Please, have a seat," she said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from her desk. "I wanted to talk to you about Friday's interview." Here it comes, I thought. The gentle letdown. The encouragement to keep trying. The suggestion that I might be a good fit for a junior faculty position somewhere down the line. "The committee was unanimous," she continued. "We'd like to offer you the position as department head for sustainable urban development." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" She smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from her. "We're offering you the job, Dr. Brooks. Pending final approval from the Board of Trustees, which is typically just a formality for appointments I recommend personally." Wow. I don't know what to say. "The salary is competitive for department head positions at research universities," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "Along with full benefits, research funds, and a substantial budget for program development. You'd start January 1st, which gives you time to finish any current projects and prepare for the spring semester." I opened the folder with trembling hands. The salary figure at the top of the first page was more than twice what I'd ever made in my life. Below it were details about research support, conference funding, sabbatical opportunities, and a comprehensive benefits package that included everything from health insurance to retirement planning. "This is incredible," I managed. "I can't believe you're offering this to me." "Believe it," she said firmly. "You're exactly what this program needs. Fresh perspective, innovative research, and the energy to build something truly impactful. Professor Sterling wasn't the only one who recommended you, by the way. I reached out to colleagues at other institutions who were familiar with your work. The feedback was consistently excellent." We spent the next hour discussing practical details, office space, administrative support, the timeline for hiring additional faculty. She walked me through the campus, showing me the building where my department would be housed, the laboratories I'd have access to, the conference rooms where I'd be presenting to university leadership and external partners. "One more thing," she said as we concluded our tour. "The board meeting where your appointment will be finalized is next Thursday. It's typically just a formality, but you're welcome to attend if you'd like. Sometimes new department heads like to introduce themselves to the trustees." I accepted immediately. After years of feeling invisible and undervalued, the idea of being formally recognized by a university board of trustees felt like validation I desperately needed. That evening, I called my best friend Zoe Martinez, who'd been my closest confidant throughout graduate school and beyond. She was working as an environmental consultant in San Francisco, one of the few people in my life who truly understood the significance of what I'd just been offered. "Natalie, oh my God, this is amazing!" She screamed into the phone when I told her the news. "Department head, at 32? Do you realize how incredible this is?" "I'm still processing it," I admitted. "It doesn't feel real yet." "It's real, and you deserve every bit of it. Your research has been groundbreaking, your publications are cited constantly, and now you get to build a whole program around your vision. This is huge." "I haven't told my family yet," I said quietly. "What? Why not? They'll be so proud." I thought about my mother's phone call, about her suggestion that I pursue entry-level marketing work, about being introduced as Marcus's sister at the engagement party. "It's complicated," I said finally. "I think I want to wait until everything is completely finalized." "Your call?" Zoe said, though I could hear the confusion in her voice. "But when you do tell them, they're going to be blown away." After we hung up, I made myself a celebration dinner of takeout Thai food and allowed myself to imagine what my new life might look like. My own office with my name on the door. Graduate students conducting research under my guidance. Partnerships with cities working to become more sustainable and resilient. The opportunity to turn academic theory into practical solutions that could help communities adapt to climate change. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But as I would learn soon enough, sharing good news with family who had never believed in you in the first place was more complicated than I'd anticipated. The real test wouldn't be proving myself to a university board of trustees. It would be convincing my own parents that their disappointment in me had been misplaced all along. The week passed slowly, each day feeling like a small eternity as I waited for the board meeting that would make my appointment official. I spent the time researching potential faculty hires, outlining curriculum for the first courses I'd need to develop, and beginning to draft a 5-year strategic plan for the department. The work felt energizing in a way that job searching never had. Instead of trying to fit myself into someone else's vision, I was finally being asked to create my own. Thursday morning arrived crisp and clear, with the kind of bright autumn sunshine that makes Portland look like a postcard. I dressed carefully in my best suit, added the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me for luck, and arrived at the university with plenty of time to spare. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the president's conference room, the same space where I'd interviewed just a week earlier. Dr. Vasquez met me in the lobby, looking polished and confident, in a way that reminded me of the professional woman I was about to become. "Ready for this?" she asked with a smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." The conference room was more crowded than it had been for my interview, with 12 board members seated around the extended table and several university administrators along the walls. Dr. Vasquez introduced me to each trustee individually, an impressive collection of business leaders, former politicians, and distinguished academics who governed one of the region's most prestigious institutions. The meeting began with routine business, budget approvals, construction projects, policy updates, before reaching the agenda item I was waiting for. Dr. Vasquez stood to present my appointment, projecting my CV and research highlights on the large screen at the front of the room. The committee's recommendation for the new Department of Sustainable Urban Development is Dr. Natalie Brooks, she began, launching into a comprehensive overview of my qualifications and vision for the program. She highlighted my publications, my research awards, the innovative aspects of my work that had caught their attention. Dr. Brooks, said Margaret Chen, the board chair and former mayor of Portland, we've all read your materials, and I have to say, your research on urban climate resilience is exactly what cities like ours need. Can you tell us how you see this program contributing to real-world policy and planning decisions? This was my moment. I stood up, grateful for all the hours I'd spent practicing presentations to skeptical audiences, and launched into a clear, passionate explanation of how academic research could translate into practical solutions for urban sustainability challenges. Climate change isn't a future problem, I said, clicking through slides I'd prepared showing local examples. It's happening now, in our cities, affecting real communities. This program will train the next generation of urban planners, policymakers, and environmental scientists to work collaboratively on solutions that are both scientifically sound and practically implementable. The questions came quickly after that, each board member wanting to understand different aspects of how the program would operate. How would we measure success? What partnerships were we planning with local governments? How would graduates be prepared for careers in this emerging field? I answered each question confidently, drawing on my years of research and my deep understanding of the challenges facing urban communities. This was what I'd been preparing for my entire academic career, even when I didn't realize it. The vote is unanimous, Margaret Chen announced after the trustees conferred briefly. Dr. Brooks, congratulations. We're excited to see what you build here. The applause that followed was polite but genuine, and as I shook hands with each board member, I felt a profound sense of arrival, not just at a new job, but at the professional identity I'd been working toward for years. Dr. Vasquez walked me out of the building afterward, her expression warm with satisfaction. How does it feel to be our newest department head? She asked. Surreal, I admitted, but also exactly right. Good. Take the rest of the day to celebrate. Starting Monday, the real work begins. I drove home through the Portland streets in a daze, my mind spinning with everything that had just happened. At a red light, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my parents' contact information. My finger hovered over the call button for a long moment before I put the phone away. This news deserved to be shared in person, in a way that would make it impossible for them to minimize or dismiss. That evening, I sat in my small apartment, looking out at the city lights, thinking about how dramatically my life was about to change. In just 2 months, I'd gone from being the family disappointment to heading a major university department. The woman my mother had described as unemployed and impractical was about to become one of the youngest department heads in Pacific Northwest University's history. But first, I needed to tell my family, and something told me that conversation wasn't going to go the way I hoped it would. I spent Friday morning at the university, meeting with Dr. Park about potential faculty hires and reviewing the beautiful corner office that would soon have my nameplate on the door. The space was larger than my entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the campus quad and built-in bookshelves that I couldn't wait to fill with my research materials. A mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, and I could already picture myself sitting behind it, meeting with graduate students, and collaborating with colleagues on groundbreaking research. The previous department head left behind some excellent resources, Dr. Park explained, showing me filing cabinets full of grant information and contact lists for potential research partners. The transition should be smooth, especially with your background in applied research. As we talked, I found myself checking my phone repeatedly. I decided to tell my family about the position in person, and I'd been planning the conversation all week. The announcement deserved more than a phone call. It needed to be delivered in a way that would make it impossible for them to minimize or dismiss what I'd accomplished. I drove to Salem that afternoon, my heart racing with anticipation. The 45-minute drive through the Willamette Valley gave me time to rehearse what I wanted to say, how I wanted to frame this incredible opportunity. I imagined my mother's face when she realized that her unemployed daughter was about to become a department head at one of the region's most prestigious universities. I pictured my father's surprise when he learned about the salary, the research budget, the respect this position commanded in academic circles. Their house looked exactly the same as always. Manicured lawn, perfect landscaping, the kind of suburban prosperity that spoke of careful financial planning and conventional success. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering my courage, before walking up the familiar front path. My mother answered the door wearing gardening clothes, her hands dirty from what looked like fall cleanup in her flower beds. She seemed surprised to see me. "Natalie! I wasn't expecting you. Is everything all right?" "Everything's great, actually. I have some news I wanted to share with you and Dad." She looked concerned, the way parents do when their adult children show up unannounced. Come in. Your father's in his study working on some insurance files, but I'm sure he can take a break." The house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, the signature scent of my mother's fall decorating routine. She'd already switched out the summer decor for autumn themes: orange and burgundy throw pillows, decorative gourds on the mantel, wreaths made of dried leaves hanging on various doors. Everything was perfectly coordinated, the way it had been my entire childhood. "Dad?" She called up the stairs. "Natalie's here. She has something she wants to tell us." He came down a few minutes later, still wearing his reading glasses and carrying a manila folder. At 62, Kenneth Brooks remained an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair that made him look distinguished rather than old. He'd been successful in the insurance business for 3 decades, building a regional agency that employed 40 people and served clients throughout the Pacific Northwest. "This is a nice surprise," he said, settling into his favorite recliner. "What brings you down here on a Friday afternoon?" I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. This was my moment, the chance to share the most significant professional achievement of my life with the people who'd raised me. "I got a job," I began. "A really good job." My mother's face brightened immediately. "Oh, that's wonderful! Where? What kind of work?" "Pacific Northwest University. I'm going to be heading their new Department of Sustainable Urban Development." There was a moment of silence as they processed what I'd said. My father removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a habit he'd had since I was a child whenever he was thinking. That's great, sweetheart," my mother said carefully. "What exactly does that involve?" "I'll be building an entire academic program from the ground up, hiring faculty, developing curriculum, managing a research budget, establishing partnerships with cities and government agencies. It's a department head position." My father leaned forward slightly. "Department head? At your age? Are you sure you understood correctly?" "I'm sure, Dad. I interviewed with the university president and the board of trustees. The position comes with a substantial salary, full benefits, research funding, and the opportunity to develop one of the most innovative environmental programs in the country." My mother's smile seemed frozen, like she was struggling to process the information. "That sounds very academic. Is it a permanent position or just temporary?" "It's permanent. Tenure track with the potential for full professorship." "Dad, the salary is more than what you made when you started your agency." He raised his eyebrows at that. "How much are we talking about?" When I told them the figure, my mother actually gasped. It was more money than either of them had expected me to earn in their wildest dreams. Certainly more than they thought was possible in environmental science. "That's quite a lot for a teaching job," my father said slowly. "It's not just teaching. I'll be conducting research, securing grants, working with municipal governments on sustainability initiatives. This is exactly the kind of position I've been working toward my entire career." My mother stood up abruptly. "I think this calls for a celebration. Let me get some wine from the kitchen." While she was gone, my father and I sat in comfortable silence. I could see him processing the news, trying to reconcile his understanding of my career prospects with what I'd just told him. "I have to admit," he said finally, "I didn't really understand what you were working toward with all that schooling. But this sounds like a real position, with real responsibility." "It is, Dad. Everything I've been studying, all the research I've published, it all led to this opportunity." My mother returned with a bottle of wine and 3 glasses. her earlier surprise replaced by what looked like genuine excitement. "We should call Marcus and tell him the news. He'll be so proud of his little sister." Something about the way she said it made me pause. "You want to call Marcus?" "Well, yes. Family news should be shared with family. And Vanessa will be so impressed. Her parents were just saying at the engagement party how important it is to have professional accomplishments." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. Even in this moment of triumph, the conversation was shifting away from my achievement toward how it would reflect on the family, how it would impress people like Vanessa's parents. "Mom, can we just focus on this for a minute? This is a really big deal for me." "Of course it is, sweetie. We're so proud of you. I just think Marcus would want to know immediately." She was already reaching for her phone when it started ringing. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but my mother answered it anyway. "Brooks residence?" "Oh, hello. Yes, she's right here." She looked at me with confusion. "It's for you. Someone from Pacific Northwest University?" My heart sank as I realized what was happening. I took the phone, recognizing Dr. Vasquez's voice immediately. "Dr. Brooks, I'm so sorry to bother you on a Friday evening. I tried your cell phone but couldn't reach you." "No problem at all. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. I just wanted to give you a heads up that the Portland Tribune is running a story on Monday about new faculty appointments, including your position. The reporter wanted to interview you, but I told them we'd coordinate through the university's communications office." "That sounds great. Thank you for letting me know." Also, I had a call from Mayor Davidson's office this afternoon. They're interested in discussing a potential partnership with your department on the city's new climate resilience plan. Would you be available to meet with them next week? I could feel my parents watching me intently as I spoke with Dr. Vasquez about scheduling and logistics. When I finally hung up, my mother was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. "The mayor wants to meet with you?" she asked. "It sounds like it. Part of the job involves working with local governments on sustainability planning." My father set down his wine glass. "Natalie, exactly how big is this position you've accepted?" Before I could answer, the phone rang again. This time it was my cell phone, and the caller ID showed a number from the university's main office. "Dr. Brooks, this is Jennifer Walsh from University Communications. Dr. Vasquez asked me to reach out about the Tribune article. The reporter also wants to include some background about your research and publications. Could we set up a time to talk about how you'd like to be represented in the story?" As I scheduled the interview, I watched my parents' expressions change from confusion to something approaching awe. The reality of what I'd accomplished was beginning to sink in, not through my explanation, but through the evidence of other people taking me seriously. "Jennifer," I said before hanging up, "could you email me a copy of the press release about my appointment? I'd like to share it with my family." "Absolutely. I'll send it right now." When I ended the call, my mother was already on her phone and I could hear Marcus's voice through the speaker. "Mom, slow down. What are you talking about? Natalie got what job? She's going to be a department head at Pacific Northwest University. The mayor wants to meet with her. There's going to be an article in the newspaper." I could hear the surprise in my brother's voice through the phone. "Natalie, are you there?" "I'm here," I said, taking the phone from my mother. "Congratulations. This sounds incredible. I had no idea you were even looking at university positions." "Thanks, Marcus. It all happened pretty quickly. Vanessa's going to flip when I tell her. Her dad always says the university is one of the most prestigious employers in the region. This is huge, Nat." After I hung up, my parents sat in silence for a moment, clearly struggling to reconcile this new information with their previous understanding of my career prospects. My mother's phone chimed with an email notification. "The press release is here," she said. Opening her email app, she began reading aloud. "Pacific Northwest University is pleased to announce the appointment of Dr. Natalie Brooks as the founding director of the new Department of Sustainable Urban Development. Dr. Brooks brings extensive expertise in environmental science and urban planning, with particular specialization in climate-resilient city design. Her research on green infrastructure integration has been published in leading academic journals and cited in federal climate policy reports." She looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between amazement and what might have been pride. "It says here you've published 15 peer-reviewed articles and received grants totaling over $200,000. That's just during my doctoral and postdoctoral work, I said quietly. My father was reading over her shoulder. This paragraph talks about your testimony before state environmental committees and your consultation work with municipal planning departments. Natalie, why didn't we know about any of this? The question hung in the air like smoke. Why didn't they know? Because every time I tried to talk about my work, they'd changed the subject or suggested I find something more practical. Because they'd introduced me to people as unemployed rather than asking what I actually did. Because they'd been so focused on conventional markers of success that they'd completely missed the significance of what I was building. I tried to tell you about my research, I said carefully, but it seemed like you weren't interested in the details. My mother's face flushed slightly. Well, we didn't understand what it all meant. You made it sound like you were just studying plants or something. I study how cities can become more sustainable and resilient in the face of climate change. How urban design can reduce environmental impact while improving quality of life for residents. It's not about plants. It's about the future of human civilization. The weight of my words seemed to settle over the room like fog. For the first time in my adult life, my parents were seeing me not as their disappointing daughter who'd spent too long in school, but as an expert in a field they were beginning to understand was critically important. My father's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and frowned. This is from Bill Henderson. You remember him? He's been my insurance partner for 20 years. He says he just saw an announcement about you on the university's website. He's asking if you're available to consult on a climate risk assessment his company is developing. I stared at him. Your business partner wants to hire me? Apparently so. He says climate change is becoming a major factor in property insurance, and they need expert guidance on risk modeling. Another piece of my professional puzzle was clicking into place in their minds. This wasn't just about academic prestige or abstract research. What I did had practical applications that affected businesses, communities, and policy decisions. My mother set her wine glass down and looked at me directly. Natalie, I owe you an apology. We clearly didn't understand the importance of your work. Or the fact that there actually were career opportunities in your field, my father added. I feel like we've been pretty ignorant about what you've been accomplishing. It was more acknowledgement than I'd expected. Certainly more than I'd ever received before. But even as I appreciated their newfound recognition, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had taken external validation, newspaper articles, job titles, salary figures, for them to take me seriously. Thank you for saying that, I replied. It means a lot. My mother stood up suddenly. We need to celebrate properly, and we need to call your Aunt Claire. She's going to be so excited. She always said you were special, even when we didn't fully appreciate what you were working toward. As she bustled around the kitchen, presumably preparing some kind of celebratory meal, my father and I sat together in the living room. The silence between us was different than usual, thoughtful rather than awkward. You know, he said eventually, I've been thinking about climate change more lately. The insurance industry is starting to take it very seriously. Sea level rise, extreme weather events, changing precipitation patterns. It's all affecting risk calculations. That's exactly what my research addresses, I said. How urban infrastructure can be designed to adapt to those changes while reducing their impact. Maybe you could explain it to me sometime. The technical aspects, I mean. I'm starting to think I should understand this stuff better. It was such a simple request, but it felt like a gift. My father, who'd spent my entire academic career suggesting I find something more practical to do, was asking to learn about my work. I'd love that, Dad. My phone rang again, and this time it was Zoe calling from San Francisco. Natalie, I just saw the announcement online. This is incredible. You're going to be the youngest department head in the university's history. You saw it online? The university posted it on their website and social media. It's getting shared everywhere in environmental science circles. Dr. Martinez from Berkeley just texted me asking if you're the same Natalie Brooks who wrote the paper on urban flood management that he's been citing in his grant applications. As Zoe talked, I could see my parents listening to every word, their understanding of my professional standing expanding with each piece of information. The woman they'd thought was unemployed and impractical was apparently well known and respected in academic and policy circles across the country. After I hung up, my mother returned from the kitchen with a tray of appetizers and a fresh bottle of wine. "I called Aunt Claire," she announced. "She's driving down from Seattle tomorrow to celebrate with us. She said she always knew you were going to do something amazing, and she wants to hear all about your new position." "That's wonderful. I'd love to see her." She also said something interesting. She mentioned that she's been following your research online, reading your articles. Apparently, she understands your work better than we do. There was a note of embarrassment in my mother's voice, and I realized she was beginning to understand just how disconnected she'd been from my actual accomplishments. "Mom, it's okay. Environmental science isn't exactly dinner table conversation for most families. But it should have been for us," she said firmly. "You're our daughter. We should have made an effort to understand what was important to you." The conversation continued through dinner, with my parents asking detailed questions about my research, my publications, and my plans for the new department. It was the first time in years that they'd shown genuine curiosity about my work, rather than polite tolerance. As the evening wound down, my father pulled me aside as I was getting ready to leave. "Natalie, I want you to know that your mother and I are proud of you. We may not have shown it very well, but we always believed you were capable of great things. Thank you, Dad. That means everything to me. I also want to apologize for some of the things we've said over the years, about finding something more practical, about your career prospects. We were wrong, and I'm sorry." It was more of an apology than I'd ever expected to receive, and it felt like a door opening between us that had been closed for years. As I drove home through the dark valley roads, I reflected on how dramatically the evening had unfolded. I'd arrived hoping to share my good news, and had ended up receiving acknowledgement and apologies I'd never thought possible. But underneath the satisfaction of finally being recognized by my family, there was a lingering sadness about all the years when my accomplishments had gone unnoticed or dismissed. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The newspaper article had been published online early, and apparently my appointment was generating more attention than anyone had anticipated. Scientists from other universities were reaching out about collaboration opportunities. Former classmates were sending congratulations. Even people I'd lost touch with years ago were getting in contact to express their excitement about my new position. But the message that meant the most came from Professor Sterling, my former doctoral advisor. "Natalie," his text read, "I always knew this day would come. You're going to do extraordinary things at PNU. The field of urban sustainability is lucky to have you leading the next generation of researchers. Congratulations on achieving everything you worked so hard for." As I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my professional success and family recognition I'd been craving for years, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Genuine satisfaction with the path I'd chosen. The years of struggle, the financial uncertainty, the family misunderstanding, it had all led to this moment. But even as I celebrated, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was still ahead. Building a department, leading faculty, managing budgets, working with city officials. These were responsibilities that would define not just my career, but potentially the lives of students and communities for years to come. The recognition was wonderful, but now I had to prove that I deserved it. The Monday morning newspaper arrived with my photograph on the front page of the business section. I stared at the image, a professional headshot the university had taken during my interview process, positioned next to a headline that read, "Local scientists tapped to lead groundbreaking environmental program." The article was longer and more detailed than I'd expected, featuring quotes from Dr. Vasquez about my research and insights from city officials about the urgent need for urban sustainability expertise. I was reading the article for the third time when my phone started ringing. The first call came from my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who'd lived in the building longer than anyone and had always been kind but distant. "Dr. Brooks?" she said, her voice filled with excitement. "I hope you don't mind me calling. I saw your picture in the paper this morning, and I had to tell you how proud I am to have you as a neighbor. My grandson is studying environmental science at Oregon State, and when I told him about you, he nearly fell over. He's read your research." Before I could respond fully, another call was coming through, This one was from someone at the Portland City Planning Office, asking if I could meet with their climate resilience team later in the week. As I hung up from that conversation, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Your father and I drove to 3 different stores this morning to buy copies of the newspaper. We're so proud we can't stop talking about it. Linda Walsh called. She wants to know if you're available to speak at Vanessa's professional women's group next month. The irony wasn't lost on me. Linda Walsh, who'd expressed such sympathy for my mother at the engagement party about having an unemployed daughter, was now eager to showcase me as a success story to her social circle. By noon, I'd received 12 interview requests from regional media outlets, 6 invitations to speak at conferences, and an email from a literary agent who'd seen the newspaper coverage and wanted to discuss the possibility of turning my research into a book for general audiences. The quiet academic life I'd been living for years was suddenly very public, and I was struggling to process the rapid shift. That afternoon, I met with Dr. Vasquez to discuss the media attention and how to handle the growing demands on my time. This is exactly what we hoped would happen, she said, reviewing the stack of interview requests I'd printed out. Your appointment is generating the kind of visibility that benefits the entire university. But we also need to make sure you have time to actually do the job we hired you for. We spent an hour developing a media strategy that would allow me to represent the university effectively while protecting my time for the real work of building the department. She assigned me a communications liaison who would help filter requests and schedule interviews strategically. There's something else we need to discuss, Dr. Vasquez said as our meeting was winding down. The mayor's office called this morning. They want to fast-track their climate resilience planning, and they're proposing a significant partnership with your department. This could be the kind of high-profile project that establishes your program as a national model. The project she described was ambitious beyond anything I'd imagined. The city wanted to develop a comprehensive adaptation plan that would serve as a template for other municipalities facing similar climate challenges. They were offering funding for graduate student research assistantships, access to city data and planning processes, and the opportunity to implement pilot projects in actual neighborhoods. When would they want to start? I asked. January, right when you officially begin. It's aggressive, but it could put your department on the map immediately. I accepted without hesitation. This was exactly the kind of work I dreamed of doing, research that could have immediate practical impact on real communities. That evening, I drove back to Salem for dinner with my parents and Aunt Claire, who'd arrived from Seattle as promised. Claire was my mother's older sister, a retired urban planner who'd spent her career working on transportation and housing policy. She'd always been the family member who seemed to understand my academic interests, though I'd never realized how closely she'd been following my work. Natalie, she exclaimed as I walked into my parents' house. I've been bragging about you to everyone I know in Seattle. The planning department there is buzzing about your appointment. They want to know if you'd consider consulting on their waterfront climate adaptation project. We spent dinner discussing my research in detail, with Claire asking technical questions that demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of urban sustainability challenges. My parents listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification on terms or concepts they didn't understand. It was the first time I'd ever had a family dinner where my work was the central topic of conversation. I have a confession, Claire said as we were finishing dessert. I've been reading your papers for years. When Patricia would complain about you being in school too long, I'd look up your publications online. I knew you were doing important work, even if the rest of the family didn't understand it yet. My mother looked embarrassed. I feel terrible about that now. I should have made more of an effort to understand what Natalie was accomplishing. The important thing is that you understand now, Claire replied diplomatically. And Natalie, I hope you know that not everyone in the family was blind to your potential. As we talked, my father's phone kept buzzing with messages. Finally, he glanced at it and shook his head in amazement. This is Bill Henderson again, he said. Apparently, word is spreading through the insurance industry about your expertise. He's got 3 other companies that want to discuss climate risk consulting with you. Dad, I'm going to be pretty busy with the university position. I can't take on a lot of outside consulting work. I know, but the fact that people are asking shows how valuable your knowledge is. I'm starting to understand why that salary figure was so high. You're not just an employee. You're an expert that organizations are willing to pay premium rates to access. The conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. My mother answered it and returned, looking puzzled. There's a reporter from Channel 8 at the door, she said. She wants to do a follow-up story about your appointment and its significance for the region. I spent the next hour being interviewed in my parents' living room, with my family watching from the kitchen as the reporter asked about my research, my vision for the new department, and my plans for working with local governments. It was surreal to be discussing urban sustainability policy in the same room where I'd been dismissed as impractical just days earlier. After the news crew left, my mother sat down next to me on the couch with a serious expression. "Natalie, I need to tell you something. Last week, when Linda Walsh asked about you at the engagement party, I told her you were unemployed. I said you'd studied plants or trees or something like that, and that we were hoping you'd find something more practical to do." "I know, Mom. I heard you talking to her in the restroom." She looked stricken. "You heard that conversation?" "I did. It hurt, but I also understood that you didn't really know what I was working on." "Well, Linda called me this morning after seeing the newspaper article. She wanted to apologize for what she'd said, and she asked if I could arrange for you to speak at her professional group. I told her I'd have to ask you, but I also told her that I owed you an apology for misrepresenting your accomplishments. It was more acknowledgement than I'd ever expected, and I could see the genuine remorse in her eyes. I appreciate that, Mom, and I'd be happy to speak to Linda's group if my schedule allows. There's something else, she continued. Your father and I have been talking about having a proper celebration for your appointment. Something bigger than just family dinner. We want to host a party and invite everyone. Neighbors, family, friends, people from your father's business. We want to show you off properly this time. The idea of my parents hosting a party to celebrate my academic achievements felt like a complete reversal of everything I'd experienced growing up. But as I thought about it, I realized it represented something important. Their willingness to publicly acknowledge what I'd accomplished and to admit they'd been wrong about my career prospects. That sounds lovely, I said. But can we wait until after I start the position? I want to make sure everything goes smoothly first. Of course. We'll plan it for February, once you're settled in. The week that followed was a whirlwind of media appearances, planning meetings at the university, and conversations with potential faculty hires. Every day brought new opportunities and responsibilities that reinforced the significance of what I'd achieved. But it also brought unexpected challenges, particularly around managing my family's sudden enthusiasm for my career. My mother called me daily with updates about people who'd seen my media appearances or read about my appointment online. She'd begun keeping a scrapbook of newspaper clippings and printed web articles, something she'd never done for any of my previous accomplishments. My father started introducing me to his business contacts as my daughter, the department head at Pacific Northwest University, a phrase that felt strange but gratifying after years of being introduced simply as my daughter, Natalie. Marcus called on Thursday evening, his voice filled with excitement. Nat, this is incredible. Vanessa's been showing everyone at her work the newspaper article. Her boss wants to know if the university would be interested in a corporate partnership on sustainability initiatives. That's great, Marcus. I'm definitely interested in exploring corporate partnerships. Also, Mom told me about the party they're planning for February. Can Vanessa and I help with the planning? We want to make sure it's worthy of what you've accomplished. It was touching to hear my brother's enthusiasm, especially considering how distant we'd been in recent years. Our relationship had always been complicated by the different ways our parents viewed our achievements. But this felt like an opportunity to connect as adults rather than competing siblings. I'd love your help, I said. And Marcus, thank you for being so supportive. It means a lot. Are you kidding? I'm proud to be your brother. I always knew you were brilliant, even when I didn't understand what you were working toward. Friday brought a call that put everything in perspective. Dr. Vasquez phoned to tell me that the university had received a major federal grant to study climate adaptation strategies, and they wanted my department to lead the research. This is a 3-year, $2 million project, she explained. It would fund multiple faculty positions, graduate student research, and pilot programs in cities across the Pacific Northwest. Are you prepared to take on something this significant right out of the gate? The scope of what she was describing was overwhelming, but it was also exactly the kind of work I'd been preparing for my entire career. Absolutely, I said without hesitation. This is why I went into this field. Good. The formal announcement will be made next week, which means more media attention, but it also means your department will be launching with the kind of resources and visibility that most programs take years to develop. That evening, I sat in my apartment looking out at the Portland skyline, thinking about how dramatically my life had changed in just 2 weeks. The woman who'd been hidden away at table 18 at her brother's engagement party, dismissed as unemployed and impractical, was about to lead a federally funded research initiative that could influence urban planning across the country. My phone rang, interrupting my reflections. It was Zoe calling from San Francisco. I just heard about the federal grant, she said. Natalie, do you realize what this means? You're going to be running one of the most significant urban sustainability research programs in the country. I'm still processing it all, I admitted. 2 weeks ago, my mother was suggesting I apply for entry-level marketing jobs. And now she's planning parties to celebrate your success. It's like the universe decided to prove to your family just how wrong they were about you. Sometimes I wonder if the recognition would mean as much if they'd supported me all along. Maybe not, Zoe said thoughtfully. But the fact that you achieved all this despite their lack of support makes it even more impressive. You did this because you believed in yourself and your work, not because anyone else expected you to succeed. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began working on a draft of the research proposal for the federal grant. As I typed, I thought about all the students who would benefit from this program, all the cities that could become more resilient to climate change, all the communities that could be better prepared for an uncertain future. This was bigger than family recognition or professional validation. This was about using my knowledge and skills to address one of the most critical challenges of our time. The years of struggle, the financial uncertainty, the family misunderstanding, it had all been worth it to reach this moment. But even as I celebrated, I knew the real work was just beginning. Building a department, managing a major research initiative, training the next generation of sustainability experts. These were responsibilities that would test everything I'd learned and push me to grow in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Saturday morning brought one final surprise. I was having coffee and reviewing grant applications when the doorbell rang. Standing outside my apartment was a delivery person holding an enormous bouquet of flowers. "Dr. Brooks?" he asked. "These are for you." The card attached read, "Congratulations on your appointment and the federal grant. We're so proud to have you as a daughter. Love, Mom and Dad." As I arranged the flowers in my largest vase, I realized that this simple gesture represented something profound. For the first time in my adult life, my parents weren't just tolerating my career choices, they were celebrating them. They weren't just acknowledging my achievements. They were proud of them. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still complicated feelings about the years when I'd felt unsupported and misunderstood. But as I stood in my apartment, surrounded by evidence of professional success and family recognition, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. The sense that I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The phone rang again, and this time it was Dr. Park calling with questions about faculty hiring for the spring semester. As I talked through our plans for building the department, I looked out my window at the city I'd soon be helping to make more sustainable and resilient. This was my moment, my opportunity to make a difference in the world, and finally my family was ready to celebrate it with me. 3 months into my new position, I stood in my corner office watching the January rain streak down the floor-to-ceiling windows, thinking about how completely my world had transformed. The mahogany nameplate on my door read Dr. Natalie Brooks, Department Head, Sustainable Urban Development, and every time I saw it, I felt a small surge of pride. The office that had seemed impossibly grand during my interview now felt like home, filled with my books, research materials, and the framed photograph of my family that had been taken at the celebration party in February. That party had been everything my parents had promised and more. They'd rented the ballroom at the Willamette Valley Country Club, the same venue where I'd been relegated to table 18 just months earlier, and invited nearly 200 people to celebrate my appointment and the federal grant. The guest list had read like a who's who of Salem's professional community, plus faculty colleagues from the university, city officials I was working with, and environmental scientists from across the region who'd become collaborators and friends. The most meaningful moment had come when my father stood up to give a toast. Kenneth Brooks, who'd spent years suggesting I find something more practical than environmental science, had looked out at the gathered crowd and said, "I want to talk about my daughter, Dr. Natalie Brooks." For too long, I didn't understand the importance of her work or the significance of what she was building. I thought practical meant conventional, and I was wrong. Natalie is addressing one of the most critical challenges of our time, and she's doing it with brilliance, dedication, and vision. We couldn't be prouder of the woman she's become and the work she's doing to make our communities more resilient. The applause had been thunderous, but what meant even more was seeing tears in my mother's eyes as she listened to him speak. Later that evening, she'd pulled me aside and said, "I want you to know that we've learned from our mistakes. We'll never again underestimate the value of what you do or fail to support your dreams." Now, as I prepared for my afternoon meeting with graduate students, I reflected on how the dynamics with my family had evolved. Marcus and I had grown closer than we'd been since childhood, bonding over our shared experience of building careers in competitive fields. He'd started asking my advice about sustainable design principles for his architecture projects, and I'd been consulting with his firm on several green building initiatives. Vanessa had become an unexpected ally, using her marketing expertise to help me develop communication strategies for community engagement around sustainability projects. My relationship with my parents had transformed most dramatically. They'd become genuinely curious about my work, attending lectures I gave, and asking thoughtful questions about climate science and urban planning. My mother had started volunteering with a local environmental nonprofit, while my father had begun incorporating climate risk assessments into his insurance practice. It was as if my professional success had given them permission to care about issues they'd previously dismissed as impractical. The knock on my door interrupted my reflections. Dr. Park entered with a stack of applications from prospective graduate students. "These are the strongest applications we've received," he said, setting them on my desk. "The word is definitely out about what we're building here. Students from top programs across the country want to work with us." I flipped through the files, impressed by the caliber of candidates. Young researchers who wanted to study everything from urban heat island mitigation to green infrastructure financing. Students who shared my passion for translating academic research into practical solutions for real communities. "Any standouts?" I asked. "There's one in particular," he said, pulling out a file. "Sarah Kim from UC Berkeley. Her undergraduate thesis on community resilience planning is extraordinary, and she specifically mentioned your work on inclusive sustainability as the reason she wants to join our program." I read through Sarah's application materials, noting her impressive academic record and her experience working with community organizations in Oakland. Her personal statement spoke eloquently about growing up in a neighborhood that flooded regularly and wanting to develop solutions that would protect vulnerable communities from climate impacts. "She reminds me of myself at that age," I said, passionate about the research but determined to make it matter in the real world. "Should I schedule an interview with her?" "Absolutely. And make sure she knows about the community partnership projects we're developing. I think she'd be perfect for the flood resilience work we're doing with North Portland neighborhoods." After Dr. Park left, I turned my attention to the stack of meeting invitations on my desk. Since taking the position, I'd been amazed by the number of organizations that wanted to partner with our department. City governments from across the Pacific Northwest were reaching out for consultation on everything from transportation planning to coastal adaptation. Federal agencies were asking us to contribute to policy development. International research consortiums were inviting us to join global climate studies. The most exciting opportunity had come just last week, an invitation to present our research at the United Nations Climate Change Conference. The organizers had specifically requested that I discuss our work on community-centered adaptation planning, research that had grown out of my early papers on green infrastructure, but had evolved to encompass much broader questions about climate justice and equitable development. My assistant knocked and entered with my afternoon coffee and a reminder about the faculty meeting scheduled for 4 o'clock. Dr. Vasquez also called, she said. She wants to discuss the New York Times interview request when you have a moment. The Times had reached out the previous week about doing a feature story on innovative university programs addressing climate change. Our department was one of 3 they wanted to profile, alongside established programs at Yale and Stanford. The recognition felt surreal, being mentioned in the same context as institutions I'd looked up to throughout my academic career. I spent the next hour reviewing research proposals from faculty candidates. Building the department meant not just developing curriculum and securing funding, but also recruiting brilliant researchers who shared our vision of engaged, community-focused scholarship. We'd already hired 3 exceptional junior faculty members, and I was hoping to add 2 more before the fall semester. The afternoon faculty meeting was productive, focused on planning our participation in the upcoming climate conference and discussing new partnership opportunities with regional organizations. As my colleagues shared updates on their research projects, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction about what we were building together. This wasn't just an academic department. It was a community of scholars committed to addressing one of the defining challenges of our time. After the meeting, I walked across campus to the library, where I was scheduled to give a guest lecture for an undergraduate environmental studies course. The auditorium was packed, with students sitting in the aisles and others standing along the walls. As I looked out at their eager faces, I thought about my own undergraduate years, when I'd first discovered my passion for environmental science but had no idea where it might lead. How many of you worry about climate change? I asked to start the lecture. Nearly every hand in the room went up. Good, I said. You should be worried. But I also want you to be hopeful, because your generation has the opportunity to develop solutions that previous generations couldn't even imagine. That's what we're doing here, translating concern into action, research into policy, knowledge into justice. I spent the next hour talking about our department's work, the projects we were developing with local communities, and the career paths available to students who wanted to work on sustainability challenges. During the question and answer session, a young woman in the front row raised her hand. Dr. Brooks, what advice would you give to students whose families don't understand why they want to work on environmental issues? The question hit close to home, and I paused for a moment before answering. I'd tell them that sometimes the people who love us most have the hardest time understanding paths that are different from what they know, I said. But if you're passionate about this work, if you believe it matters, then pursue it with everything you have. Do the research, develop the expertise, create the solutions. Eventually, the importance of what you're doing will become impossible to ignore. After the lecture, several students approached me with questions about graduate school applications and research opportunities. One young man, who introduced himself as David, seemed particularly interested in our community partnership work. I grew up in a neighborhood that deals with flooding every winter, he said. I've seen how environmental problems affect people differently depending on their resources. That's exactly the kind of work I want to do. I gave him my card and encouraged him to apply to our graduate program. As I walked back to my office, I thought about how many bright, committed students were discovering their passion for this field. The future of environmental research was in good hands. That evening, I had dinner with Zoe, who was visiting Portland for a conference. We met at a restaurant downtown, not far from the apartment where I'd spent so many months worrying about my career prospects and feeling disconnected from my family. I still can't believe how much your life has changed, she said as we caught up over wine. 6 months ago, you were struggling to get interviews. Now you're running a major research program and being profiled in national media. Sometimes it feels like it happened to someone else, I admitted. But mostly it feels like everything I worked for is finally coming together. What's been the biggest surprise? I thought about the question carefully. Honestly, how much the family stuff mattered to me. I thought I'd moved past needing their approval, but having their support now makes everything feel more meaningful. They really came around, didn't they? Completely. My mom calls me every week to ask about my research. My dad has started reading academic papers on climate science. Marcus and I collaborate on projects now. It's like they're seeing me clearly for the first time. Or maybe you're finally in a position where your accomplishments are impossible to overlook. Maybe. But I also think they genuinely regret not understanding sooner. The apologies felt real. As we talked, I realized how much my perspective on success had evolved. Early in my career, I'd been focused primarily on personal achievement, publishing papers, earning recognition, advancing my own research agenda. But now, leading a department and working directly with communities, I understood that the most meaningful success was collective. It was about creating opportunities for other researchers, developing solutions that helped real people, building institutions that could continue making impact long after I was gone. "What's next?" Zoe asked as we finished dinner. "So many things. The UN conference next month, expanding our community partnerships, hiring more faculty. We're also developing a policy fellowship program that would bring city planners and environmental advocates to campus for intensive training. And personally," I smiled, "I'm happy, Zoe. Really happy. I love my work, I have a great relationship with my family, and I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The next morning, I arrived at my office to find an email that made me pause. It was from Linda Walsh, Vanessa's mother, who had been so sympathetic about my unemployment at Marcus's engagement party. "Dear Dr. Brooks," it read, "I hope you remember me from Marcus and Vanessa's celebration. I wanted to reach out about an opportunity that might interest you. I'm chairing the board of the Regional Climate Action Council, and we're looking for a scientific advisor who can help us develop evidence-based policy recommendations. Your expertise would be invaluable to our work. Would you be available to discuss this role?" I read the email twice, marveling at the complete reversal it represented. The woman who'd expressed such pity for my mother about having an unemployed daughter was now seeking my expertise for a major regional initiative. I drafted a polite response expressing interest in learning more about the position. As I typed, I thought about how this encapsulated everything that had changed in my life. Instead of being something my family needed to make excuses for, my career had become something that opened doors and created opportunities. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Saw the announcement about the UN conference in today's paper. Dad and I are so proud. Can we take you to dinner this weekend to celebrate?" 6 months ago, that same newspaper coverage would have been met with confusion or concern about impracticality. Now it was a source of family pride and an occasion for celebration. As I prepared for my morning meetings, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The years of graduate school, the financial struggles, the job rejections, the family misunderstandings. It had all seemed so overwhelming when I was living through it. But now I could see how each challenge had taught me something important, how each setback had made me more resilient, how each small victory had built towards something larger. The young woman who had sat at table 18 feeling invisible and dismissed had become someone whose work was recognized nationally, whose expertise was sought by institutions across the country, whose research was making a difference in communities facing real challenges. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that validation from others, while gratifying, wasn't what gave my work meaning. The meaning came from knowing that what I did mattered, that the research I conducted and the students I trained were contributing to solutions our world desperately needed. As I walked to my first meeting of the day, I passed the campus quad where students were hurrying between classes, their faces focused and determined. Some of them would undoubtedly face the same kinds of challenges I had. Family members who didn't understand their choices, career paths that seemed uncertain, moments of doubt about whether their work mattered. I wanted them to know what I'd learned, that persistence pays off, that expertise eventually gets recognized, and that sometimes the people who doubt you most become your proudest supporters when you prove them wrong, not through argument but through achievement. The path isn't always clear, and the timeline isn't always what you expect. But if you believe in your work, if you develop real expertise, if you stay committed to making a difference, eventually the world will make room for what you have to offer. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, your family will be there to celebrate when it does. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.